Saturday. This is not your regular kind of forum. We did this last year. First year we did it, and I got this crazy name for it called Future Rutan Designs Symposium. And the objective is basically to have an open mic kind of discussion about, where we go with these airplanes from here after we're kind of back away from it and all this stuff. But this year we're doing it a little bit different because we can. We didn't have an opening topic last year. We just let the audience ask questions. But when we had the Sid Tolchin airplane donated to us this May, Sid donated the airplane because he turned 88 years old, and his insurance carrier dropped him. And he couldn't find anybody to really give him insurance anymore. And it kind of bugged me, and the more I thought about it, that I think as a pilot, it's up to us to decide when we're going to quit flying. I mean, we're all going to fly, we're all going to end flying one day somehow. But it kind of bugged me that an insurance company made that decision for him. So I started talking to Tracy Martin, with Aviation Insurance Resources, who's worked with us since the very beginning of Rutan aircraft flying experience, because I knew I had to partner with someone in the insurance industry to cover our airplanes, because help maybe control costs and things like that, and as we grew. So that's kind of what we decided to do this forum about this year, at least as an opening topic. And you can ask questions to people that are here. We have Tracy and Greg from Aviation Insurance Research, Wayne Swing up here. You sit in the audience. If you guys want to sit up on the stage, that's fine. Or you can just field these questions later. I got about 15, 18 slides like that, because I'm going to open this up with a topic about the safety of canards. When I started thinking about all this, and Tracy and I started talking about why the insurance underwriters were being critical of canards and why they're dropping canard files as they get older, things like that, I thought to myself, well, what's our safety record? And I couldn't really find much. No one has ever done a comprehensive review of the NTSB records and accident reports and things like that of our kinds of airplanes. So I posted a little note on the Canard forum, and one of the first things that popped up, immediately, Izzy Briggs, if you guys don't know Izzy, he's a big Canard guy. He'd be here right now, except he's in Norway because he bought the Defiant that was over there, that was built over there, and just bringing it back. So Izzy's up his neck in Canard flying. He donated to Steve Wright, very easy to us in 2019, right here in Boeing Plaza. But Izzy had wondered what the statistics were about rollovers, because of all this stuff about building rollover structures in the airplanes. And so he piped up right away and said, hey, I've done some of this. And he looked at accident data from 83 to 2011, basically looking for rollover incidents. But he came up with some numbers, and like I said, no one's ever looked at this before, except the other thing I found was an article, and I'll roll right into that. So it came up with some interesting stuff. The list that he used was Rutan or Rutan-based designs only. And because the builder doesn't always name it for Rutan design, not everybody that built their long, easy, or very easy called it that. Right away, you can see that there's a little bit of, slop in the data. So if it's not listed that way, we don't know how to count it. And if the NTSB, if it wasn't on their list, we don't know where to find it. So where do you go to find this at? Well, typically it's the NTSB. So Izzy looked at 229 NTSB events in that data range, and he said there was nothing prior to 83 that was published. And all of the airplanes came out in about 78, so there's a gap right there. And just looking at his rollover stuff, he said there were 27 accidents that reported the airplane wound up upside down. And 8.5% probability that if you have something go wrong, you're going to wind up upside down. And out of those 27 records, there were 9 reported at least one fatality. However, we'll show you later how statistics work. That's a 1, but we all know now, unfortunately, because the other day, Mark Rutan wound up upside down, and there was fatality in that. So now we know there's at least 2. So if the aircraft does wind up upside down, they came up with the data and said, hey, there's a 1 in 3 chance. You're not going to survive if you wind up upside down. And that was really the focus of his examination. But like I said, they came up with these numbers. So he also said that, and this text is from his report, he said, the numbers are probably higher because a lot of reports don't state how the airplane wound up, okay? And you might be able to tell that from the photos in an accident report, but you got to buy those, and he didn't. So that's where that came from. So here's kind of the percentages. Out of the 229 accidents that he looked at, there were 84 fatalities, 38%, 57 serious injuries, 65 minor injuries, but then 97 uninjured. So when I talk to people about how easy and very easy and all this stuff, one of the things that I always ask is, how safe they are. And I know a lot of people in this room that's been around this stuff for a long time, okay? Way longer than me. And I know a lot of people that have had issues with airplanes and wound up in fields and other designs. And it's one of the things this is how I answer it. It never ceases to amaze me how many people I know that have put an airplane in the field and just kind of dusted themselves off. Long easy in the field, just dusted themselves off and walked away. Because we're sitting in a big fiberglass roll cage. So by their nature, by the foam and fiberglass construction, they shed energy as they go bouncing off things. So that 97 uninjured, I think, is a pretty good number. So, and that's Izzy donating the Steve Wright and Izzy to us. Thank you very much, Izzy, for that, and also these data. So the next thing I stumbled across was an article by Rutan, okay, and it's the only one I ever found on the internet that talked about Canard safety. And it goes all the way back to 2010, and he looked at the 4 most common types of Canards. And there you have it, easy, very easy, velocity, quickie. And those numbers the accidents that he found. And his time frame was a little bit different than Izzy's, so it really kind of adds to it. And then he looked at all of the Canard safety issues, the numbers that he came up with, and balanced it against all of homebuilts in general. So this first chart right here is percentage of accidents that he found based on pilot error, okay, and pilot miscontrol, loss of control kind of thing, and breaks it down by type. So, it's kind of an interesting chart. You look at it and go, okay, well, it looks like the quickie, okay, is kind of spikes that thing right here. And then a yellow line across the top is the pilot error for the entire homebuilt fleet. So we're really not much worse or much better than the entire homebuilt fleet. So, and then the next chart that Ron came up with is breaking it down into the individual airplanes, okay? And you can see the phase of flight and the individual models. So, and the one that jumped out at me, and hopefully is jumping out at all of you, is the landing phase, and that blue line, that's the quickie. Now, I'm not bashing quickies today, okay? But we all know, that we're Canard guys, we know that the quickie, with the wheels out there at the end of the Canard, okay, is a little bit of a challenge to handle on the ground. And so here that backs that up. And we go, hey, the quickie guys, your landing phases are a little more challenging than anybody else. Well, what I learned from all this is the quickie data with the insurance underwriters are looking at stuff like this. It skews everything. It makes us all look bad. So, but the other thing you look at is the long easy, okay, and the very easy, where they are. That's the yellow and blue lines, okay. So takeoffs seem to be pretty tough on the quickie guys, but not so much for the long easy. And the very easy is a little weight bar, a little bit, and then climb, okay, maybe not too many issues there. Cruise, looks pretty good. And landing phase though, long easy is, right up the top of everybody else. So there's some text out of Ron's article that I pulled out that I thought was really important. And give everybody a second to kind of read this. But the stuff I put in bold, I think is really the important statement here. 4 out of 10 inadequate pre-flight cases involve the failure to secure the canopy prior to takeoff. Now, Tracy's going to mention this, I hope, because recently there were a couple of claims based on canopies unlatching on takeoff, and in the age of the pilot became a factor. I don't know how many of you guys know the story, but back in the early days of the Rutan stuff, you go back to the Canard pushers and read this story. There was the very first person that ever had a canopy unlatched on takeoff died. They crashed. And everybody went, oh my God, if you have a canopy open on takeoff, you're going to die. And that's what I heard when I got my degrees. And then a guy showed up in Pensacola. I was going to flight training down named Ralph Gator. I know some of you know him. Ralph was 10 feet tall to me. He was a retired Navy F4 guy, commander, POW. I mean, he was, Harrow was going through Navy flight training. This guy showed up. He had a very easy, he was the only very easy guy I ever met, okay? Well, Ralph had a canopy come open on takeoff. And he wrote about it in the Canard pusher. And all he did was reach up with his left hand and bring the thing down. And then he flew the airplane back around the pattern with one hand, holding the canopy down, landed it, pulled off, latched the canopy, took off in the other direction. And he wrote an article in Canard pusher and said, hey guys, if your canopy comes open in flight, you're not going to die. You just got to fly the airplane, okay? But the perception was that if you don't latch the canopy right, it comes open, you're in a bad place. But it's still happening, okay? And that's kind of frustrating from my end since I do so much training and I see guys that can't close the canopy. So that was a big data point. And the other thing is this paragraph here. We always talk about how the Canards can't stall. But if they can't stall, why are we still having speed control problems, okay? And as I highlighted there, yeah, it's a little better that we can't stall, but it's really not as good as some people expect, because not being able to stall by itself means nothing if you're too fast when you're landing or you're too slow. Now, this is the point I was talking about with Mark Brown, okay? One rollover fatality. You start reading this stuff, and Ron brought this out because what really jumped out after looking at Izzy's study and Ron's study was that there's not really good data out there, okay? Like I said, nobody's done a comprehensive study, and I hope somebody in the audience will jump up and say, hey, I'll help with that, because we really need to. But in the second paragraph, he talks about, with a small sampling rate, okay, each accident's worth 3-4% of the total. But if you increase it by 1, okay, it almost doubles it. So Mark's accident just doubled the rate of fatalities for inverted upside down. So, with a small sampling, we don't really know what we truly have, but this is the best we got. And the problem is, if the underwriters are looking at the safety data for Canards, and this is what they see, they're not seeing the real picture because we just don't know. This is a really good chart too that Ron came up with. It's broken down by airplane, the 4 airplane types, and you look at the ones that spike the chart, okay? And the one that really struck me is long as it's being yellow up there. Undetermined loss of power. Our engines are really important, okay? But the problem with home builders is a lot of us we're all on a budget. We put a lot of effort into our airframes, our paint jobs. We buy a mid-time motor, we hang it on there, and we hadn't thought about the fact that the magnetos are 20 years old and stuff like that. It's a lot of stuff I see when I'm hanging around out of the jet guy shop in Covington with Robert Harris, and all the airplanes that come in refurbished. So that's kind of a big one there, And then you look down to other mechanical, and which one is it? It's the quickie. Well, I have no answer for that. But maintenance errors, and undetermined loss of power. Our airframes are solid. I mean, these airframes don't break much, not much maintenance to do on an airframe. So what's left to maintain? Well, it's your motor. Spend a little more time looking at your motor. Well, then Ross started looking into the fatal accident ratio. He said, the ratio of fatal accidents versus the overall numbers of accidents of most of the Canard aircraft is about average, okay? In other words, we're really not any better or worse than other home builds, okay? Well, I tend to argue the opposite a little bit because we're below that line. That blue line is the home built average line. So long easies, right below it, velocities are below that. Very easy, is kind of hovering right at that line, a little bit above it, okay? But look up in that far right-hand corner, We all know the reputation of those airplanes look pretty awesome, So this is kind of a good chart. And then he looked at the overall accident rate compared to all the other home builds out there. And like I said, the statement there in bold jumps out at me. So long as you vary, have nearly the lowest rate in the home builds checked. Okay, and that makes us all feel good, right? And the next chart will show that, because compared to all the rest of the home builds out there, we're way below that line, okay? So, and that goes back to what I was talking about, how many people I know that put long easies or very easies into the field and just dust themselves off and walk away. So, and I'll tell you what, I'm one of them. The pictures you saw earlier, that's my very easy. The engine quit at about 150 feet. And I went up in the pasture across the street from my airport. Yeah, airplane's all messed up. I opened the canopy, I stepped out, and I looked around and said, wow. Yeah. If I was in some other airplane, I might not be talking today. So, this is a couple of things that I pulled out. This actually Ron pulled out, was in his article. And I thought this would be good, because what is it talking about? Open canopy, okay? When I teach in the Canard Flight Academy down there in Speed Canard, I pound it into their brains. Check the canopy, check the canopy, check the canopy. My personal standard is the canopy's either open or it's down and latched. Because you close that canopy on a cold day and you taxi out there and it looks closed and you get distracted, because distractions will cause us to make mistakes, that's when you're going to take off the canopy and latch. We're human beings, we look at something and think it's what you want it to be, and it's not, and not recognize it. So I actually tell people to develop this muscle memory as they're taking the runway, reach up and push on that thing. This is a good example. Pilot lost control of the aircraft, attempting to close the canopy in flight, like the very first guy that happened to, okay? Don't be that guy. Here's another one. We talked about approach speeds, or, we just kind of stall. Well, we know what happens to these airplanes if we get slow, right? They come sinking out of the sky. In this case, this guy apparently got slow enough to have the wing drop down and did it again and wound up in the trees. But the part I actually should have made this one bold. But down here at the bottom, it says he stated that the last airspeed he was aware of was 85 to 90 miles an hour. Well, that's a typical approach speed to us, right? So the last time he looked was when his speed was good. And then he didn't remember what it was after that. There's only one scenario here. He got slow, he started to go to sink rate, and went in. So, I'm going to make a shameless pitch here for the Canard Flight Academy, because I personally think, after looking at all this thing, one of the things that we probably can do better at is training. Because where do you go to get training in Canard? Once you get checked out in your airplane, whether you check yourself out or somebody checking you out, where do you go to get recurrent training in your Canard? I know you guys have a training program, right? So, but in the long easy and very easy world, we really don't. The Canard Flight Academy is just an incredible thing that happened just by chance. This airplane fell into our lap, was donated to us to Speed Canard, and since then, I know there's some graduates of our program in the audience. If you want to ask some questions, you can. It's the best Canard trainer you could imagine. Prior to getting this airplane, we were talking about building our own two-seat long easy trainer, because we don't have nothing in the back seat but a stick. We're not compliant with FAR 191, 109, where you have to have dual controls to give instruction. You can't really see well from back there. I've tried. This is from the shop to the back seat of the speed Canard. I can do everything from back there that the guy in the front seat can, except start the airplane and change radio frequencies. I can almost see everything they're doing. It's an incredibly good trainer. And everybody that's come through there has done really, really well. As an example, this is Tim Dyer. Now, he was a retired Delta pilot. You know, he owned a Drummond Yankee. He flew real well. We spent a day with him in the speed Canard, and the next day, he's in a long easy, transition right into a long easy. There is no place else in the world you can get checked out in a long easy the way we do it, where we train you in the speed Canard and then put you in the long easy and off you go. And his first flight was a no-brainer because he had all that experience. I recently flew with a guy just finished the Cozy 4, and I told him, I said, before you fly your airplane and you want to come up and get training, I said, go get some time in 172 because you're not very current, get your head back in the game of flying. And when you're standing there looking at your airplane with your guidance airworthiness certificate, and you can't think of anything else that airplane needs to go fly, then come see us. I spent a day with him, he did a super job. He went home, the next day he did his first flight. And I asked him, what was your anxiety level? What would that have been like had you not come to fly with us? And he said, I've been through the roof. And all you guys that did first flights on airplanes you built, you know what that is. So imagine if you had gotten a couple hours of the speed Canard, and maybe even flown our long easy before you went home and flew yours. Yes, Ken?
I know that the speed Canard is certified, but how do you get around this latest crazy FAA decision, compensation, and homebuilts when you transition them to the museum's long easy?
We don't know. That's the same question I have right now too. Up until this point, we didn't. But there's another issue about it because we got an experimental airplane over here. We're gonna let this guy fly, and we can't do it for free. So we always were working at that end and around by, well, we're a nonprofit. Here's the airplane, go fly it, make a donation to the museum. Okay, I have the answer for that. Okay, because you can't rent a home bill. So if I want to let somebody fly the long easy, how do I do it? I don't know. Okay, is it right or wrong? It's the best way we can come up with it. With new stuff, I don't think it'll be around long enough to bother us. Okay, so anybody interested in that or know somebody in that situation, all the information's on the website. There's a lot of good stuff there. I'm going to end it right there. I hope everybody enjoyed that because this is what I think what we're looking at with the insurance stuff because the numbers that we have are all we have, but I don't think they're very right because it's not really dug into well enough. So I'm going to hand the stage over to Tracy now. Who's going to talk about the insurance issues and all that stuff, and this in the background. Okay, just kind of keep these numbers in the back of your mind when she's talking about what you can do to help mitigate issues with insurance. And the other thing is peer pressure. If you know someone that's not flying well or not doing things right, okay, remember these charts and think that all of this affects us all. So, come on. Thank you.
I don't know how long you guys can see this. So you're probably all aware of the increase in the underwriters that are canceling insurance and changing insurance as you approach the senior market. So we put together this chart. We went to all of the carriers that we are appointed with to try to get an idea of like what's going on, what's the current senior guidelines, what can we expect going forward so that we can provide the best service for our clients as possible. I don't know if you guys can see this too much. If you want a copy of this, I'm going to be updating this, and if you want to get me your information or pick up a card, once I get it updated, I'll be happy to email it over to you so you can have it for reference. But basically, we put all of the carriers down the left side, and our company, we're appointed with everyone in the United States. So when we shop for our clients, we shop every carrier. Not every company can do that. Fortunately, we can do that. And then the first category is new business. So that would be if you're going into a new carrier for the first time, that's where you would fall. And single engines and twins. So you'll see at the top company is Hallmark Aerospace, and if it's new business, they'll take you up to 74 with the basic med, and at 75, you need class 3. And then at twins, they changed the requirements at age 85 to dual only. So what we did was we did this for every company. And then the renewal category, which is the second set over here on this side, would be if you were already with that company and you're renewing, what you can expect to have happen as you age in flying. So with singles, with aerospace, it's 85 dual only. If you come down to IAT, you'll see that at 75 they require an annual medical, and at 80 they switch to dual only. London, at 70 is an annual medical. And then you can see that people start to get cut off, dual only, and then eventually at 80, it's non-renewal. In the summary of this, when we work with our clients, we try to, if we can, end up placing you with AIG or Global. It's where we prefer to put you because they'll let you fly unimpeded till you're 100, provided you're not crashing airplanes. And they just let you alone. Sometimes they don't write the model that we may need them to write, but the rates are reasonable, their service is good, they're good companies, but they're the only two that are on there that are just gonna let you alone and let you fly. So, in regards to the Canard aircraft, one of the things that Richard and I have been working on is, you guys get a constant complaint of the rates going up, the rates are absurd. We're trying to put together the numbers for a presentation to the underwriters, and currently I have 3 different carriers that have agreed to come to the table to discuss the Canard aircraft and working on a program where they will insure them at a better rate. But we need factual data to take to them. We need more information than what we currently have to entertain that. We're going to get probably one shot at this, so we want to make sure that it's done right. Feel free, Rick, step in here with anything that you have to add to it. We talked to one of the underwriters from Star this week. He came over to our booth, and he was saying that in the past, they read reports on experimentals, and they have, in the history of the company, on experimentals, over 100% loss ratio all of the time. And so our question was, well, why are you writing them at all? And he said, because we're trying to provide a service to the industry and to promote aviation and take up the slack in other areas. And I'm not so sure that most of us would run a business with 100% loss ratio and continue to do the same thing. So if we can find some way to come together and improve that, I think that there will be an opportunity there for some synergy between the carriers and you guys to make a positive impact on your insurance rates. He did explain to us in the LSA category that they just did reports last year, and their loss ratio in all LSAs were over 200% in every category.
What you're telling me is they make no money off of home build policies.
That's correct.
Wow.
That's correct.
So they're losing money off of the LSAs?
That's correct.
Yes. Well, I just want to make a quick comment too. Star Aviation, Tracy was saying that we had this conversation with Star. But I've been doing this since 1985, started with Venco Insurance Company. Even at that time, they were running over 100% loss ratio on all experimental aircraft. So this has been a long, long problem, but these companies have been insuring them to help the industry. So yeah, it has been a problem for a long time.
How does this chart change if you just go liability only?
The underwriting guidelines are the same whether you're getting full claim coverage or liability only. So
I mean,
it
hull
doesn't change.
versus liability.
It doesn't change. When one of the things I want to tell, and I'll take your question, one of the things that they noted, I asked for loss runs for the different models of Canard aircraft, like could I have the loss runs for Velocity, could I have them for Quickie, could I have them for the Cozy, and they group their aircraft differently than how we would think they group it. So they basically have 26 categories, and they're popped into the category in which they fit, and that's what they're determined by. So when you have like the numbers on a Quickie with the ground issues, they kind of applies to everything. When they're lumped into the category, it brings everybody's numbers into a different realm, so to speak. But one of the comments that he made to me when we were having this discussion was that they've noticed a higher percentage of loss in the second, third, fourth owners over the first owner builder, which suggests either maybe someone who's not as familiar with the aircraft, or a lack of proficiency in the maintenance, or an unfamiliarity, or maybe it's just time and things needing to be upgraded or whatever. So that I'll share that with you guys so you can read into that whatever needs. But that was a definite statement from the underwriter that once it goes to the second or third owner, there's a difference there. So I had a question back here from the gentleman in the baseball cap.
Let's have one. The active liability only in LSA is high. So that's great because we got no inertia. Jefferson good as something else other than the passenger.
Well, that's a great question. So I had recently one of my clients who was insured liability only. He was a public accountant, and he bought himself it was either an Aerotrack or an Aerocraft. I can't remember right at the moment. But he had an engine, he had liability only. He was with Global Aerospace, and he had an engine out and ended up in a canal in Florida, up to his neck in the water. And amongst their costs, even if it was liability only, they still had to pay for recovery of the aircraft, and they had to pay for cleanup, and then they had to pay for environmental restoration on board. And also storage, because then it had to be investigated and turned over to the NTSB. And this happened months ago, and it's still in storage. And so they have eaten their shirt on this one. But you don't think about all of the environmental restoration things that people I have. Another guy that put his 206 down in the mountains a couple weeks ago, and the Park Service is demanding, it's over the top. It was in Colorado, out in the middle of nowhere, and the costs for the environmental cleanup were pretty astronomical.
Just a quick comment on the LSAs and the high loss ratio. Really, the main reason is not necessarily that they're bad aircraft, but there's fewer numbers, and they generally have a higher L value. You know, you're generally well over $100,000. So if you have one total loss, that has a big impact on a relatively small number of insurable units. So, yes, they get excited about loss ratios, but it's, to me, understandable why they would have until there's more numbers. It's not like it's 172 where there's tens of thousands of those airplanes flying. There's only hundreds of them flying. So that makes a big difference on the loss ratio, but they still underrate according to loss ratios, unfortunately.
And one of the things that Richard had mentioned just in closing here today was he was talking about even in holding each other accountable. And I think back to the days I started flying with my grandfather when I was a kid, and I got my ticket when I was 18, and I worked as an A&P out of Hagerstown, Maryland. And the guy that I worked for was this old Marine, about this tall, he was built like a fence post, he had fiery red hair, and he was just a very stern and serious individual. But he allowed me in my job to go fly whenever I could with whomever I could, but there were certain people that he wouldn't allow me to fly with. And he would say, you can't go with that guy. So he kind of took this father figure role in my life. And eventually in time, there were about 4 people that I wasn't allowed to fly with. that he forbid it. And I honored him because he was my boss, he was my senior, and it was out of the goodness of his heart. But over the years, those 3 or 4 people wound up in fatal plane crashes due to their own pilot error. And so I wonder, like, what would have happened if someone could have approached them and said, like, look, we need to work on this and have some accountability to our fellow pilot or whoever, just to help them come out of an error as, something that they're doing that everyone else can clearly see that they can't see. Because if I were doing something wrong that's going to cost me my life, I sure want to know what it is. But anyway, I just want to comment on that little portion of it. When Richard said that, I was thinking about it. Oh, yeah,
Just a quick comment about underwriters, and we, up until January 2020, we came off a 10-year run where underwriters were pretty flexible in their underwriting, premiums were pretty stable, even low, and they would argue that they were lower than that what they should have been, but they had to do that to keep their business because there was a lot more competition, many more companies in the marketplace than there are today. But today, since January 2020, they're trying to improve their bottom line. They're really focused on training. So I would say, I'm always asked, what can I do to lower my premiums? Well, there may not be much that you can do today, but you can start today, at least by improving training more often, building your proficiency and staying current. And I think those are big things that will ultimately lead to better loss ratios. So I would sum it up as training and proficiency.
I can say I found that my insurance company is really happy that I participate actively in the FAA WINGS program. They seem to like that.
Yeah, it is, and that training as well as others training too, more so than just a flight review every 2 years. So if you can do some additional training like that, some companies even give a discount for that.
So annually, you're asked how many hours you fund. Is that factored into the premium whatsoever? If you include under 30 or if you include 100?
Not so much in the premium, but the underwriters do look at that because if it's a low number, they may require a dual requirement entry prior when you renew your policy. But indirectly it does, because the more you fly every year, you're building your total time and making model time, and those do make the fact, do improve your premium.
What is a low number?
It varies by company, but I'd say if you're less than 25 hours a year.
So if you guys remember AOP came out with an article about probably 6 to 8 months ago where they were talking about senior pilots, and they had this company that was going to offer more to senior pilots. And I had a suspicion that it was one of our carriers, so I emailed the VP and I was like, "Is this you guys?" And he said, "Yeah, it's us." And that, in regards to your question, we will shop all the markets for our clients, and that particular company, if you're a senior pilot, will not look at you if you have not had 25 hours in the past 12 months. So it's an automatic kick out of, and they will not budge on it. It's firm.
I wonder if you can go back to that statistic you gave where one of the companies was claiming 100% loss rate. I must not understand that. So they're claiming that every home built they've ever insured crashed. And how do you get this 100%?
Money in, the money out.
Go ahead, what's the
Okay,
second one?
money. Okay. So it's
So,
dollars.
So yeah, it's dollars. So in the category of experimental, they have 100% loss ratio plus. So if they take in that year in premium, $300,000 from experimentals, which is just an arbitrary number, they're saying they're spending way more than that on the claims that occur.
Okay. And then if, I don't know what the numbers you play in, but if home builds have, let's say, a 20% higher accident rate that's certified, I don't know what the number is, doesn't that imply with one of these carriers that if they're getting 100% losses on home builds, it must be at 70% losses on factory bill, the insurance company could stay in business for that. I must not
I'm gonna
understand
let
this.
Greg answer this because Greg actually worked as an underwriter, and he has a couple more years to be in this industry, so I'm gonna let him address this for you.
Those numbers, of course, vary, by standard airworthy type of aircraft, but historically, when I was in the underwriting side of things, Cessna 172s, the PA-28 fixed gear models, they would be somewhere in the 40-50% loss ratio category. As you're getting up to retracts and tail wheels, they're going to have higher loss ratio. I think most of standard airworthy in the single piston fixed wing area is probably 70% or less, I would say. I haven't seen any actual statistics from the underwriters on that, but historically I think it's been in that range. So they are making money on the standard airworthy fixed gear piston, single engine piston, probably also on multi-engines, but older multi-engines they're really shying away from lately just because of higher incidence of gear ups and gear failures.
As a younger pilot, I mean, I understand training and proficiency is a good thing, but getting additional ratings, even though they may not be in the aircraft we're flying right now, does that help to lower the rate, or does that really not really change your rate from a either a sole owner or a renter perspective? Because hey, they can jump into a multi-engine, or they can jump into a seaplane or whatever else, on a whim, and then they have to cover that cost as well. Does that change anything?
It depends on the aircraft, exactly how much of an impact the rating has. I can tell you that on many of their aircraft, an instrument rating does have an impact on one, if the company will even offer terms, and to the premium. When you're shopping 12 carriers, and if the carrier requires an instrument rating for that aircraft, and you don't have that, you're automatically knocked out of an offer from that carrier. So why somebody get offers from other carriers? What if that carrier was the carrier that was going to offer you the very best premium on that aircraft? You're not even going to know because you don't have the instrument. I don't think that I see much difference with commercial rating. It really comes down to time. So if you're in a tail wheel, they want to see tail wheel time, they want to see baby model time. Do you have anything to add to that, Greg?
I think I heard you mention non-owner or like a renter's policy too. Pilot hours make no difference on that particular product. It's just coverage limits that you purchase. Student pilots could pay the same premium as an ATP. So on that particular product, it doesn't matter. But with an aircraft owner policy, your pilot experience and ratings does make a difference. IFR being the main one that makes a difference. And then for experimental aircraft, we're having trouble putting student pilots into pretty much any experimental aircraft. So nowadays, you want to get a sport license or a private license before you buy an experimental aircraft.
I was in municipal government some years ago, and a case went against the government somewhere in the country. Premiums doubled. Everybody decided to be self-insured. So all the states created their own insurance companies and took care of it. Now, with the loss ratio that we're looking at here, this is something a very good option. You want to blend in with everybody else, but it's the first thing that I thought when we started talking about insurance, and the guy who's denied at 88.
when we take information to them to present to them the type of pilot, their experience, and we've asked you guys for pilot history forms. Part of the reason that we want that information is so that we can show them what kind of pilot you are, and if you have experience in multiple aircraft, and the bigger the picture they get, the more comfortable they feel about writing it. But they become real black and white on the age issue. It's very difficult to get them to defer from the standards that they've set. But the self-insuring, I had a discussion yesterday with a guy about non-owners insurance. He said, well, I'm just going to put non-owners insurance. Well, non-owners insurance is going to cover you on a plane that you own more than 25% of. And it's also not going to cover for a mechanical issue. It's not going to cover for an at-fault. And he wasn't aware of that. So they're good in that they're a cookie cutter, and the rates are reasonable, and there's no involved process. Anybody can get them if you're flying someone else's aircraft. But it's not a good way to go about the totality of your coverage on your own aircraft that is registered to you.
As far as self-insuring, I think there's plenty of aircraft owners out there that are flying without insurance. So I think that there is some self-insuring going out there right now. And also to another aspect, you can modify your policy. You don't have to carry full coverage, liability, and physical damage coverage. You probably all know that. You can also self-insure the physical damage and just carry liability only. So there are some ways to help adjust that premium if you're willing to give up some coverage.
What about if you possibly took in partners or something? Is that a way to get around the age thing? Taking a younger partner or something like that?
They're going to look at the pilots that are named on that policy. They're going to look at the age of all those pilots, and if one of those pilots is age 70 or older, or whatever the magic number is for that airplane, and that insurance carrier, they're still going to underwrite based on the older pilot. Now, we may have an older pilot that has thousands and thousands of hours, and they're putting in a low-time private pilot, and the rate that's generated from each of those pilots may be similar, but they're still going to look at the older age pilot.
In regards to that, one design is, I was talking to Donna a little at the safe dinner the other night, and her husband is transferring his policy over to our brokerage. And I said, we really need to get you in a position at 67. We really need to get you in a position for when you hit 70, we want to make sure you're in the right place. And he said, well, I've got like 3 years until I got to worry about that. And I said, well, what happens if you have a claim between now and then? You've got a 5-year look back. So really you should be in a position where you want to find your forever insurance in by the time you're 65. Because if you have a claim after from 65 on, you're going to miss it because of the 5-year look back that all of the carriers are pretty much subscribing to now. And then you're going to write you with a claim on it if it's within 5 years.
I may have missed you in terms of what I said, this is what I meant. When I said self-insured, what we did, the cities and counties of Maryland created their own insurance company. And they self-insured in that manner as a group. And that's what happens states all across the country. They created their own insurance companies and they actually insured each other that way. And they bought the insurance from other carriers and so forth.
Quick question, first off, I'm looking to buy one easy, so this is interesting, maybe you're selling or you know somebody, congratulations, Michelle, but what's the delta, is as a new owner and liability owner, if you do a checkout at RAFE or do have, as a new owner, what's that look like?
That's a great question, and that's currently something that Richard and I are working on, is bringing the training syllabus to the underwriters, sort of to like, we would like a discount for having certificated training, as it's provided by other, like FAA wings, certain carriers will give you a discount for that, and they like to see certificates, they want to see proof, they want to staff, so they say, oh, yeah, I did that. But I'm working with Richard right now to come up with the training syllabus, and we're trying to get the whole package of the numbers, because basically I'm probably gonna get one opportunity to show this, and it has to be right when I take it to the table with the underwriters. But it's a great question, and it is presented, there are certain underwriters that are very well aware of the RAFE and the training in the speed Canard, and when I talk to them, they know what it is, and they're happy to see it on there. But we don't have the formal, like, you'll get a 5% discount if you have that, or we're in the stages of creating that, which is why I'm here today, because this is something we've been sort of hammering out and working on here recently. I don't have the time to come up with all the data. You guys have to do that. When you get it together and you have the package of it, then I'm going to go as your ambassador to the underwriters and present this to the carriers and request special care for Canard aircraft owners. And we just have to have the presentation down.
Does your velocity training program help guys out with insurance? You know?
Say it again.
Does your velocity training program have an impact on people's policies?
Absolutely.
You want to find out?
Yeah, I fit in the category of the older guys. I talk slow, and I can't hear very well, so I'm going to talk loud.
What?
Can you hear me down there? Hi. I do a lot of this kind of stuff with groups, home builder groups, and get a lot of questions. As you probably know, as a kit aircraft manufacturer and owner, I always tell the truth. Oh, yeah.
Especially top speed and slow speed, right?
Oh, yeah, it's one of the same. As far as training is concerned, it's so important, and we so desperately encourage our builders, our owners to get flight training, get recurrency training. We provide the airplane, we provide all the fuel, we provide an instructor. We have two of them. One's a retired airline captain who owns a Velocity. The other is an existing, she's a lady, she flies for Southwest Airlines, and her husband works for us, and she does all of our scheduling and most of our CFI work. When you get a woman in the other seat and you think you can't fly the airplane, but she can, you're going to pay attention, because you aren't going to let her think that she's better than you are. I mean, you understand that, guys, don't you? How many ladies? No. In any case, currency is so important, and some of the things that they have mentioned here are also so important in the safety of our pilots. The statistics are there. The unfortunate thing is, if you have a fairly new airplane, you have an accident where somebody dies, the skewing that takes place is very severe. Some of you know we had a twin-engine accident here in Wisconsin several months ago. Both of the pilots who were multi-engine rated were killed. And NTSB really didn't play a serious role in determining the reason. Well, the speculation goes on and on, and some of you perhaps know about it, perhaps have speculated. Right after takeoff, the pilot reported an engine problem. Said, I'm returning for a landing. Ultimately, both engines were feathered. Now, if you got a twin-engine airplane and you feather the engine, it isn't turning. You're going to land somewhere. Or unfortunately, they hit a tree and went inverted and killed both of them. Now we have like 15 airplanes flying, one accident, and that whole thing is now skewed terribly against the twin-engine airplane. Even though it won't stall like a conventional airplane, it won't spin, but the statistics are there, and it's going to be tough for getting insurance for people who are going to build a twin-engine airplane. I personally can't get insurance. I'm 85. The insurance company said, if you want to fly with your grandson, who has 120 hours total time and a private license, yeah, we'll let you fly the airplane, but otherwise you can't fly it solo. I have almost 9,000 hours of flying little airplanes, commercial instrument, multi-engine, AMP, education in aerospace. You know, they say, no, we don't want you to fly because you're too old. I get a second-class medical every year. I don't mean yours. They don't care. It's the age is the problem. There are exceptions, I'm sure. I have an airplane sitting on the ramp over here, actually, on our display. The owner's 90 years old. He said, I haven't been able to get insurance for the last 10 years. So we're selling the airplane. He lost his medical, so that's the reason. Yes, sir.
In your training program, this is a serious question. Your training program, who trains your trainers?
Who's what?
Trains your trainers.
What about it?
Who trains them?
Well, we train them. I've done a lot of that with
I mean, in terms
instructors.
of currency and that kind of thing.
Well, they're flying all the time. They are big CFIs. They have to maintain a CFI license. If they come to us, if a CFI comes to us and say, I want to use my CFI to train pilots, okay, then they go through our CFI training program as if they were going to train other people. And we have one of them in Dallas. He's an ex-doctor who's a CFI, and our instructor trained him. He also is a velocity owner. We have one in California, ex-military guy. So yes, we train the CFIs who are going to train the other people. It's a different airplane, naturally, and most of you know. How many are actually built their long easies here? How many actually built their own? Not too many of you. Our biggest competitor is ourselves. There's a whole lot more used velocity sold. Those guys didn't build the airplane. They don't know the airplane very well, and they're more likely to have an accident because they don't understand it. Example. A fella came to us with his airplane. He says, I sold it to a guy in Georgia, and he's going to come down here and pick it up. He came down and he said, you really need some training. We'll train you in our airplane. He said, no, I got 180 hours in a Cessna 182. I do not need any training. It's a retractable gear XL with a 200 or 310 horsepower engine. Yeah, you do need some training. He said, no, I don't. He took off, flew to Georgia, first landing, gear up. Ran off the runway and hit a stone embankment. He hit a stone thing. Brusted the nose off the airplane. Walked away from it. We got the airplane back, repaired it. He came down to pick it up, and he said, now you understand you need training? He said, no, I've had my one incident. I don't need training. Now, you can't cure stupidity. Can't do it. It's happened. And those of you who bought somebody else's airplane know what I'm talking about. You don't know the airplane as well as the guy who built it. And if you don't get a little of that education, then you probably are more likely to have a problem than those who have built their own airplanes. Okay. Questions? I don't want to belabor this at all.
You get the
Yes, sir.
education one way or another.
I'm sorry?
You get the education one way or the other.
Well, you do, but if you have an accident, that's not good education.
That's the hard way.
That's a hard way. We've been training people since 1996. That's when we started our training program. And we've trained a lot of pilots. It is now time to quit. And I think somebody else is going to get this building, right?
I got some closing comments.
You got it.
You guys have anything else? Tracy, you got anything else?
I don't have anything for somebody has any questions.
What's your email address for us to get it?
Come up, get business card. You got all the stuff. Thanks everybody for coming. I just want to say one last thing about training, especially in light of Mark Maroon's accident. If you put a CFI in the back seat of your long easy, okay, think about something. This goes back to the beginning of my introduction with this insurance company, Aviation Insurance Resources. This guy named John Sweeney was the first guy I talked to. And I called him up one day because I got an email from an insurance broker. I got an email from an insurance broker in California somewhere that said, do you know anybody in my area, that any CFIs in my area, that can help a client to just follow along easy? And I said, no, I don't. How are you guys gonna get around FAR 9119 that says you have to have full set of dual flight controls? And he went, what? It's the same problem with the underwriters. A lot of times they don't understand their airplanes, okay? But if you put a CFI in the back of a long easy or very easy, this doesn't apply to velocity or quick easy. Okay? If you put anybody in the back of your long easy, how are they going to get out if there's a problem? Okay? We're feverishly working on taking the speed Canard canopy latch system and making a retrofit kit for long easy and very easy. Because I personally, as a CFI, will not get in the back seat of some of these long easy and very easy if I can't get out. Okay? And so the question I have about Mark Brum's accident is, what was the CFI in his back seat doing? Okay? Exposed himself to a hazard, got serious injuries from the rollover accident, and what was he doing? Well, he could have been giving him a VFR, okay? But are you going to put somebody in the back seat of your airplane that has no long easy experience to get a VFR? What are you really accomplishing? Okay? Just like Dwayne's training program, the Canard Flight Academy, this is not a shameless pitch for it. The product that we have is highly specialized training and highly specialized aircraft by highly experienced Canard CFIs. And that's what you need to look for, okay? So when you need a VFR, you need something, find that guy. And make sure you get out of your airplane if there's a problem. So anyways, I'm off my soapbox. Thanks everybody. Thank you very much.